Good day everyone, I am Nicole Navarro and for today's lesson we will be discussing about respiratory system. And for the objectives, after this lesson you are able to explain the function of the respiratory system, describe the process of respiration, familiarize with the structure and organs of the respiratory system. So before we start our lesson, let us answer first this one question. Why do we breathe or why do we need to breathe? We breathe in order to get oxygen that are needed or important for our cells. So these cells will be able to produce energy and they will be able to supply our blood with oxygen and also to deliver the oxygen-rich blood to the other parts of our body. So let's proceed with our lesson. What is a respiratory system and what are the responsibilities or the functions of a respiratory system in our body? Respiratory system is also known as respiratory apparatus or ventilatory system. It is a set of organs that allow us to breathe and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. Respiratory system is the one that provides oxygen to our body tissues for the cellular respiration. It removes the waste product carbon dioxide and helps to maintain acid-base balance. Functionally, the respiratory system is separated into two, which are the conducting zone and the respiratory zone. In conducting zone, it is the part of the airways that is responsible for moving air into the lungs while removing the particles. It is the zone that receives air from the nose and mouth which filter and warm it before routing it to the respiratory zone. It is also the one that traps particulate materials that could clog the respiratory zone and make it hard to breathe. In conducting zone, it includes 6 organs, which are the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchus, and bronchioles. And these structures form a continuous passageway for air to move in and out of the lungs. The first organ, which is the nose, is the only externally visible part of the respiratory system. It is where the air enters through the external nares or the nostrils. This organ also contains a cilia, which is responsible for filtering out the foreign bodies. The interior of the nose consists of nasal cavity and it's the Next is the pharynx, or also called as the throat. Pharynx is a muscular passage from nasal cavity to larynx. It is where the food and air pass through. Pharynx is divided into 3 regions, which are the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The next organ is the larynx, or the voice box. It routes the air and food into proper channels. It is also the one that prevents swallowed materials from entering lower respiratory tract, and they're responsible for producing sounds. Next is the trachea, or also known as the windpipe. It is the one that connects larynx with bronchi. Trachea is lined with ciliated mucosa that expel mucus loaded with dust and other debris away from the lungs. Next is the bronchi. It is a tube that carries air to the lungs, and it is formed by the division of the trachea. Bronchi is subdivided into smaller and smaller branches, and each bronchi goes in each lung. The next organ is the lungs. It is a pair of spongy air-filled organs that is located on either side of the chest. It is the major organs of the respiratory system and are responsible for performing gas exchange. On the other zone of the respiratory system, which is the respiratory zone, it is the part of the airways where gas exchange happen, allowing the body to trade waste carbon dioxide for fresh oxygen. It is also where the air pressure changes as people breathe in and out to inflate and deflate the lungs. The disorders of this region can include inflammation, neoplasms, and trauma. all of which can interfere with the ability to engage in gas exchange. Respiratory zone is generally found in deep inside of the lungs, and it is made up of the respiratory bronchioles, alveolar duct, and the alveoli. The first organ in the respiratory zone, which is the respiratory bronchiole, is the smallest branches of the bronchi. These smallest branches have a reinforcing cartilage, and terminal bronchioles usually end in the alveoli. Next organ is the alveoli. It is a tiny stretchy sacs and have a thin moist wall. They blow up like a balloons when we breathe in, and there are 300 million of alveoli that can be found inside of our lungs. Next is the alveolar duct. It is a tiny duct that connect the respiratory bronchioles to the alveolar sacs. Tiny end ducts of the branching airways that fill the lungs, and it is the one that assists the alveoli in their function. Next is the respiration. It is the action of breathing and the movement or the transport of oxygen from the outside environment to the cells within the tissues and the removal of carbon dioxide in the opposite direction. Respiration is also the process of breaking down of food to produce energy, and it usually takes place throughout the day and night. It means it happens 24 hours. The process of respiration is divided into four stages, which are the ventilation, pulmonary diffusion, perfusion, and last is the peripheral diffusion. The pulmonary ventilation, or the process of breathing, it is the process of moving air into and out of the lungs. It is commonly known as breathing, which are the inhalation and the exhalation. Inhalation is the process where air is inhaled through the nose and moves through the pharynx, larynx, and trachea into the lungs. And while the exhalation is the process where air is exhaled back through the same pathway. So what will happen to our organs when we inhale? When we inhale, our diaphragm contracts pushing downward, and our lungs expands as the pressure inside of our chest decreases, and the air is inhaled in through our mouth and nose. While when we exhale, our diaphragm relaxes, pushing upward, and our lungs become smaller and more pressurized by relaxing the diaphragm. And the air is also passes out through the nose and mouth. In pulmonary diffusion, or the gas exchange, it is the process whereby the gases move from an air of a high pressure to a low pressure. Pulmonary diffusion is also the ability to pass oxygen to the blood from the air sacs of the lungs and pass carbon dioxide back into the lungs from the blood. From the alveoli, the oxygen from the air we breathe enters our blood in nearby blood vessels. Once our blood is oxygenated, it carries oxygen throughout our body. For the process of gas exchange, the air that contains oxygen and the other gases will enter our body through the lungs. In the lungs, the oxygen is moved into the bloodstream and carried through the body, and the red blood cells will collect the carbon dioxide and transport it back to the lungs, where it leaves the body when we exhale. Next is the perfusion, or the blood flow. Perfusion refers to the blood flow to tissues and organs, or the transport of gases in the blood. It also involves the circulation of blood through the capillaries, which facilitates nutrient exchange. So, in the process of blood flow, the inhaled oxygen diffuses into the pulmonary capillaries and binds to the hemoglobin, and then it is pumped through the bloodstream. In the last stage of respiration, which is the peripheral diffusion, it is the exchange of gases between the blood and tissues. For the process of peripheral diffusion, the blood will carries the oxygen from the lungs around the body and releases the oxygen when it reaches the capillaries. And the oxygen is diffused through the capillary walls into the body tissues. And then the carbon dioxide also diffuses into the blood and is carried back to the lungs for release. Next is the modification in respiratory functions. At rest, the respiratory system performs its function at a constant and rhythmic pace, as regulated by the respiratory centers of the brain. At this pace, ventilation provides a sufficient oxygen to all the tissues of the body. However, there are times that the respiratory system must alter the pace of its function in order to accommodate the oxygen demands of the body. In respiratory functions, it includes three modifications. First is the hypernaria. It is an increased depth and rate of ventilation to meet an increase in oxygen demand as might be seen during in exercise or disease. Next is the hyperventilation. It is an increased ventilation rate that is independent of the cellular oxygen needs and leads to abnormally low blood carbon dioxide levels and high blood. Last is the high altitude effects. It is an increase in altitude results in a decrease in atmospheric pressure. Next is the embryonic development of the respiratory system. The development of respiratory in the embryo usually begins around 4 weeks, and the laryngotracheal tube is a structure that forms from the longitudinal extension of the lung bud. As the development progresses, the portion of this structure nearest the pharynx becomes the trachea, whereas the distal end becomes more bulbous that will form a bronchial buds. In week 7, the bronchial buds will continue to branch as development progresses until all the segmental bronchi have been formed. At the beginning around of week 13, the lumens of the bronchi begin to expand in diameter. By week 16, the respiratory bronchioles will start to form. Once the respiratory bronchioles are formed, there will be a further development that will include the development of the blood vessels, as well as the formation of alveolar ducts and alveolar precursors. At about week 19, the respiratory bronchioles are already formed, and around week 20, the fetal breathing movements may begin. The major growth and maturation of the respiratory system occurs from week 24 until the term.